Hey guys, tonight we begin with Egyptian mythology. What myths were really exist about Egypt gods and goddess? So before we begin our journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe the channel only if you genuinely enjoy my video. And also let me comment where you're watching from and what time is for you. Egyptian mythology is a captivating world of gods, goddesses, and ancient beliefs that shaped the civilization of ancient Egypt. The mythology not only explained the universe, but also played a crucial role in everyday life. Understanding the vast pantheon of deities and their stories is key to appreciating ancient Egyptian culture. Gods like Ra, the sun god, and Osiris, the god of the afterlife, held significant power and were central figures in many myths. The myths often revolved around themes like creation, the struggle against chaos, and the cycles of life and death. For instance, the creation myths vary but often involve the emergence of the world from chaotic waters, a recurring element in many depictions of the universe's origins. Deities such as Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess, also play essential roles in these narratives, illustrating the deeply interconnected nature of the divine and physical worlds. Egyptian mythology's influence extended beyond religious practice, impacting art, literature, and even the governing principles of the time. Pharaohs were often seen as gods in human form, which reinforced their authority and connection to the divine. This complex and rich mythological tapestry provides insights into how ancient Egyptians viewed their world and their place in it. For more detailed guidance, you can explore resources like my World Mythology newsletter Myth Magic for comprehensive information on these timeless myths. Ancient Egyptian mythology is rich with gods and goddesses, each playing unique roles and connected through various relationships and stories. These deities were integral to both daily life and the understanding of the universe for the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians' pantheon was surrounded not just by towering pyramids and exotic gods and goddesses with each having specific roles and stories, but also by terrifying ancient Egyptian demons. According to ancient Egyptian belief and language, the world was populated by humans, the spirits of deceased humans, gods and goddesses, and a host of benevolent and malevolent paranatural entities. The last of these, unlike the previous three entities, was not constrained by a specific Egyptian term and existed on the threshold of the divine and the real world. These entities would be known as demons. Knowledge of these Egyptian demons, as well as how to defend oneself from them and employ them to one's advantage, was crucial to the daily life of the ancient Egyptians. Demonic entities, like the plethora of Egyptian gods and goddesses, numbered in the thousands. Over 4,000 demons have been recorded. Unlike the Egyptian pantheon of gods and goddesses, the vast majority of demons did not have temples or cults devoted to them. Most importantly, demons were distinguished from each other by the specific illnesses and conditions they brought onto the living, and which ones could be used for protection. Often, demons were anthropomorphic in appearance or a human-animal hybrid, ranging from turtle-headed and human-bodied to snake-headed with human arms wielding blades. Numerous demons were even an amalgam between numerous animals in addition to having human characteristics. Although there is no official hierarchy among the host of demons identified thus far, demons are believed to have belonged to two different classes. Egyptian demons can be divided into two classes: wanderers and guardians. Often held responsible for diseases, misfortune, acts of higher deities, and things that go bump in the night, wandering demons were heavily intertwined with daily Egyptian life. Although wandering demons often traveled between worlds under the orders of a higher deity, they also acted on their own accord and thus garnered a malevolent characterization. Some of these wandering demons included Sehakik, the headache demon, he who lives on worms, he who overthrows the catfish, and the emissaries of Sekhmet. As apparent by their epithets, wandering demons were often the personification of a specific illness and punishment. Guardian demons were typically affiliated with one of two planes of existence, the netherworld or earth. Often depicted guarding gates, portals, and doors, these demons overlooked entry into sacred liminal places. Guardian demons can be split into three classes: doorkeepers, guardians, and heralds. All function to protect the purity of sacred places. These demons have titles like the Hearer, Radiant One, and One with a Vigilant Face. With the sole purpose of protecting their locality from being tainted, guardian demons were merely performing their duties and were generally not acting on their own accord. As opposed to wandering demons, guardian demons did not travel between realms and did not interfere with daily life. However, once an individual reached the afterlife, these demons took on a less appealing role for the unprepared. Whether to enter tombs or advance through the gates of the netherworld, an individual generally needed to know the demon's name, affiliation, and most importantly, to have lived by truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, propriety, and justice. If the individual did not know the aforementioned things, they would be considered impure, barred from entering, and sometimes have their existence completely eradicated. In ancient Egypt, life revolved around the preparation for the afterlife and dealing with the paranatural forces at play every day. With the depiction of demons during the Middle Kingdom becoming prevalent in art, the ancient Egyptians sought a way to protect themselves and their loved ones from the likes of these wandering demons. Protection from and the harnessing of specific demons would arrive in the form of spells, oracular amuletic decrees placed inside amuletic papyrus holders, and magic wands. Of these aforementioned forms of protection, magic wands are one of Egypt's most distinctive magical relics. Fashioned from hippopotamus, ivory, and embellished with spells that were employed throughout pregnancy and early stages of life, these wands were solely available for the elite. Additionally, these magical relics were put in the tombs of the departed and protected one's rebirth. For those who were not privileged enough for magic wands, fixed spells and symbols could be used for protection against a host of wandering demons. Although demons are considered lower entities in the Egyptian pantheon, there are gods and goddesses that are closely linked with both guardian demons and wandering demons. Anubis and Thoth, both associated with the netherworld, are frequently represented in the company of the guardian demon, a Mehmet, the devourer of the dead. A Mehmet is always portrayed in a position to consume the deceased if they do not pass Anubis-scale judgment after Thoth writes the verdict. However, if one has the necessary funerary composition to confront these tribulations, their heart will never meet the teeth of a Mehmet. As previously mentioned, despite the terrifying epithet of a Mehmet, guardian demons were not generally feared by ancient Egyptians. Additionally, neither were the gods and goddesses associated with guardian demons. Certain patrons of wandering demons, on the other hand, were feared. Daughter of the sun god, Ra, Sekhmet, was feared just as much as she was worshipped in ancient Egypt. Often recognized as the bringer of plagues, diseases, and misfortunes, Sekhmet was regarded as a chief patron of the wandering demons. Throughout numerous funerary compositions and amuletic decrees, spells and formulae were aimed at preventing Sekhmet's malicious agents from harming them. Sekhmet, on the other hand, was not without redeeming qualities. Because of her connection to medicine and healing, practitioners of medicine made her their patron deity. Though not a demon, Sekhmet is a perfect representation of the duality of demons in ancient Egypt. Ra is the sun god of ancient Egypt. He is one of the oldest deities in the Egyptian pantheon and was later merged with others such as Horus, becoming Ra-Horakhti, Amun, and Atum associated with primal life-giving energy. Ra is the Egyptian word for sun. As a solar deity, Ra embodied the power of the sun, but was also thought to be the sun itself, envisioned as the great god riding in his barge across the heavens throughout the day and descending into the underworld at sunset. As he made his way through the darkness beneath the earth, he was attacked nightly by the giant serpent Apophis, who tried to prevent the sun from rising and so destroy all life on earth. Ra is Egypt's most important deity, not only because of his association with the life-giving sun, but also through his influence on the development of later gods. Amun, who would become so popular that his cult was almost monotheistic in devotion and the most powerful in ancient Egypt, developed from Ra and shares much of his mythology. Horus, who was associated with the living king, followed this same paradigm as Ra was known as king and father of the king. He was also associated with the creator god Atum, and the two deities' names are used interchangeably in some versions of the creation myths. Ra is classified into 5 sections addressing his various roles and functions. Hema Ra in the heaven, Ra on the earth, Ra on the earth, Ra in the netherworld, Ra as creator, Ra as king and father of the king. This is suggested for this deity more so than others because of the scope of his powers, the important part he played in Egyptian religion, and his long history. Worship of Ra was already established by the time of the Old Kingdom of Egypt and continued for almost 2,000 years until, like the other Egyptian gods, he was eclipsed by Christianity. Ra is first mentioned in the pyramid texts, the oldest religious works in the world, which were inscribed on the sarcophagi and walls of tombs at Saqqara. In these, Ra gathers the soul of the king to himself and takes him to the paradise of the field of reeds in his golden barge. Worship of Ra was already well established at the time these texts, which are thought to derive from a much earlier oral tradition, were inscribed. His cult center was at the city of Iunu, better known as Heliopolis, the Greek name, which means city of the sun god. Ra is depicted in the pyramid texts not only as the supreme ruler of the gods, nor simply a comforter of the newly arrived soul in the afterlife, but as the embodiment of divine order and balance. He was known as the self-created one who appears in creation myths as the deity who stands on the primordial mound amidst the swirling waters of chaos and establishes order, gives birth to the other gods, and creates the world. Ra is enabled in this through the power of Heka, who was both the god of magic and magic itself. Magic, to the ancient Egyptians, was a divine force which allowed for all that exists to be and also enabled transformation. Ra, as the first god, created Heka and harnessed it, resulting in the birth of Heka, who then maintained and controlled the divine magic afterwards. Ra is therefore associated with this transformative power, which linked him with the sun that allowed for growth. Once associated with the sun, he was linked with Horus, the sky god and solar deity, while, as creator god, he was almost synonymous with Atum, and, finally, as the champion of order and the seen and unseen world, with Amun, the ineffable representation of the nature of existence. In this capacity, he was known as Amun-Ra. He is almost always depicted as the falcon-headed male Ra-Horakhti with the solar disk above his head, although sometimes also shown as the scarab beetle below the solar disk. His worship was already well established by the Second Dynasty of Egypt and took the form of sacrifices made in temples dedicated to him. By the time of the Fifth Dynasty, kings associated their reigns with Ra, resulting in the construction of the sun temples of the period built to honor the god. From an early date, he was worshipped at Heliopolis in the form of the Minerva's bull, the living embodiment of Ra, comparable to the better-known Apis bull. Ra in the heavens. Ra has grown old and his human subjects begin to plot his overthrow. Ra is upset and calls a council of the other gods who encourage him to smite the humans for their ingratitude. Ra summons the Eye of Ra, usually personified as a goddess, which is a powerful force that alternately does Ra's bidding or breaks free of his control to wreak havoc. Hathor is the Eye of Ra here and is released to destroy humanity. She kills thousands before Ra realizes what he has done and repents, begging her to stop. Hathor has lost all reason through the slaughter, however, and become the savage Sekhmet who, in her rage, cannot hear him. Ra orders 7,000 jugs of beer to be dyed red to resemble blood and has them poured out on the plains of Dendera. Hathor Sekhmet drinks the blood beer, passes out, and wakes as Hathor, who pledges herself as a friend to humanity henceforth. Ra is tired of ruling over humans, however, and asks the goddess Nut to carry him into the heavens. Nut turns herself into a celestial cow and takes Ra skyward on her back. On his way, Ra creates the field of reeds and organizes the administration of the world, leaving it to the other gods. Human beings will henceforth be responsible for maintaining order in keeping with the will of these gods, and Ra, having retired, will only concern himself with driving his great barge across the sky. Ra on the earth. Prior to his departure, Ra ruled over his creation directly from Earth. Ra created the laws which were later given to humanity by Osiris and Isis in the golden age of their reign before Osiris was murdered by his brother Set, who usurped power. Ra's presence on Earth was recognized by sunlight and the growth of crops as well as the changing seasons. Ra was honored through houses of life, scriptoria attached to temples, where the works of scribes were kept under the protection of the god of writing Thoth and his consort Seshat. The written word, which recorded the past and so helped to maintain balance and order in the present, was given to humanity by Thoth, but, as creator of all, ultimately came from Ra. The houses of life, therefore, were considered emanations of Ra himself, who also inspired correct interpretation of written works. Ra in the netherworld. Throughout the day, Ra sailed across the sky in his barge and then descended down into the underworld at night. The sun barge now transformed into the evening barge known as the Ship of a Million Souls, which picked up the newly arrived and justified dead to bring them to the paradise of the Field of Reeds. Ra at this time becomes merged with Osiris, the judge of the dead, and Osiris is seen as the corpse and Ra as the soul of the single deity Ra-Osiris. As this deity, Ra confers with Osiris on the deepest of levels, perhaps confirming which souls have been rightly justified before transporting them, and then traveling on through the underworld darkness toward the dawn of paradise. As the barge rolls through the underworld, it is attacked by the serpent Apophis, who tries to kill Ra and prevent the sunrise. The gods on board fight the serpent off with the help of the justified dead, while, On Earth, the living encouraged the defenders through ritual ceremonies, channeling positive energies to strengthen those on board. Every night Apophis attacks, and every night he is defeated. Ra and his crew sail on toward dawn. The justified dead are delivered to their destination, and the sunrise was then seen as the sign that Ra was again victorious, and the Egyptians would see another day. This was only one version of the soul's journey toward paradise. The soul must stand in judgment before Osiris, who weighs the soul's heart against the white feather of truth, and if the scales remain even, the soul is allowed to proceed on. If the heart is heavier than the feather, the soul would cease to exist. Ra was considered present at the judgment in his form as Ra Osiris, or invisibly as inspiration for Osiris's just decision. Ma'at, one of Re's daughters, also embodied his presence at the judgment and was among his defenders on board the barge, which, once dawn came, again transformed into the solar boat. Ancient Egyptian mythology gives credit to a number of different gods for establishing order and making the world, but those most often featured in creation myths are Ra, Atum, Ptah, and the goddess Neith. Whichever gods are named, they always have the same characteristics and power as Ra, and it is thought that Ra was present, and alone, at the birth of creation, no matter what name he was known by later. Although the priests of Ptah might claim it was their god who created all things, therefore, the Ptah they cite would actually be Ra. In the case of Atum, he was essentially Ra only by another name, and the same could be said for Neith in her creative capacity. There was nothing but swirling waters at the beginning of time when the primordial mound the Ben rose as the first dry land and Ra the self-created stood upon it. He cut his penis open and, from the drops of blood, created Hu and Sia, and then became aware of his solitude and mated with his own shadow to give birth to Shu and Tefnut, who left to establish the world. The two were gone a very long time, and so Ra sent the Eye of Ra to search for them. When the Eye brought his children back, Ra was so grateful he shed tears of joy, which fell on the fertile Ben and became men and women. Recognizing these people had nowhere to live, Shu and Tefnut mated and gave birth to Geb Earth and Nut Sky. Geb and Nut gave birth to Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder, and from these gods, all the others followed. Heka, among the oldest of the gods, is, as noted, thought to have been present already at the act of creation. Each of the gods was given their own sphere of influence so that order would be strictly maintained, and, in today's parlance, there would be no duplication of services. The gods would henceforth care for the people and, in gratitude, the people would worship and obey the will of the gods. This relationship produced balance and harmony between the people, their gods, the earth, and the afterlife, all of which emanated from Ra. Balance was the most important cultural value of ancient Egypt, and it was modelled and maintained by the king. The ruler was thought to have been sanctified by the gods for his ability to keep order, which was understood as balance/harmony. The founder of the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, the King Usakaf, epitomized this ideal in elevating the cult of Ra to the position of almost a state religion and encouraging his subjects to adhere to Re's values. Usakaf built the Nekhenri, the sun temple of Ra, near Abusa, and established a tradition venerating Ra, which continued throughout the dynasty. Usakaf was the first king to erect a temple to Ra, but all of his successors would follow suit, creating a model for the tradition of erecting temples in Re's honor, which continued throughout Egypt's history. The 5th dynasty is best known for the sun temples, as well as firmly establishing the link between a monarch and the gods. Usakaf and his successors referred to themselves as sons of Ra and were understood as literally being the children of the god. At this time, Ra was already recognized as king of the gods, but was now known as king and father of the king, who maintained order through the just rule of his sons. This policy established the king as the god's own emissary on earth and demigod in his own right. By the time of the New Kingdom, Ra had been replaced by Horus as the god of the king while he lived and reigned, and by Osiris after his death. In keeping with the belief that Ra was the self-created from whom all else came, however, it would still have been the power of Ra behind both Horus and Osiris. Osiris is best known as the god of the dead in ancient Egyptian religion, as the afterlife was created for Osiris after he was killed by his brother Set, and he enabled others to join him in eternal life. But Osiris is also connected to many other important aspects of ancient Egyptian religion. Osiris was a part of one of the most important divine pantheons and creation myths as the first pharaoh, and, alongside his wife and son, represented continuity within kingship. He was also associated with fertility, both teaching the ancient Egyptians the art of agriculture and establishing or reflecting Egypt's natural fertility cycles with his life, death, and rebirth. Osiris seems to have been an old Egyptian god, as there is evidence of his worship from at least the 5th dynasty. He probably has pre-dynastic origins. Some Egyptologists believed that he may have originally been a real person in pre-dynastic times, a shepherd turned ruler who became venerated as a god. It is suggested that the crook and flail, a symbol of the pharaoh since the earliest times, originated from Osiris. Osiris was incorporated into the Ennead of Heliopolis, a group of 9 deities held in the greatest esteem by the priests of the Nome territory of Heliopolis. They rose to prominence during the Old Kingdom and continued to be important until the Ptolemaic period, though they competed with gods venerated by other important cities. In their creation story, the primordial waters that existed at the beginning of time were personified by Nu. A mound emerged from those waters, and upon the mound sat the self-begotten god Ammon, who was equated with the sun god Ra. Ammon then spat or masturbated to produce Shu, the personification of air, and Tefnut, the personification of moisture. These siblings mated and produced Geb, the earth, and Nut, the night sky. Geb and Nut then gave birth to 4 children, Osiris and Isis, who would marry, and Set and Nephthys, who would also marry. As the oldest, Osiris was given rulership of the earth and the netherworld, occupied by the gods. The fullest version of the Osiris myth is told by the Greek historian Plutarch. It ties together the evidence from earlier periods, but there are different versions of some elements of the story. According to the myth, Osiris's younger brother Set was deathly jealous of the respect that Osiris enjoyed. This jealousy festered inside Set until he decided to kill his brother. How exactly Set killed Osiris is one of the plot points that varies. In one story, Set invited Osiris to a party, during which he offered the prize of a beautiful chest to whomever could fit inside. Of course, it was perfectly sized for Osiris, and as soon as he lay down, Set slammed down the lid and trapped him inside. He then threw the chest into the Nile, and Osiris drowned. His body eventually washed up on the shore of Byblos in Lebanon, where a tree sprouted from his chest. Isis transformed herself into a kite bird and found Osiris's body, and then used her magic to reanimate him. In another version, Set killed Osiris and then hacked his body to pieces and buried the pieces in different parts of Egypt. He may have cut up the body after Isis initially retrieved the body from Byblos. Isis set about collecting the scattered pieces and found all of them except Osiris's phallus, which had been swallowed by a fish. She then reassembled the body, and Isis and Nephthys turned themselves into kite birds, flapping their wings to breathe life back into the body. Osiris's sister wife Isis is the principal actor in the resurrection of Osiris. She led the search for his body and used her magic to bring him back to life. But Osiris and Isis's other sister Nephthys is always cast alongside her sister in the story. According to some accounts, Nephthys was part of Set's initial plot to overthrow Osiris, but she is always described as helping her sister to restore Osiris to life. In rituals carried out by the ancient Egyptians in imitation of Osiris's resurrection, it is always both Isis and Nephthys who are represented as his mourners. To bring Osiris back to life, Isis invented the process of mummification with the help of Anubis. In some stories, Anubis is the son of Osiris and Nephthys, who was convinced to seduce Osiris by Set. Nephthys sent the baby away for fear of Set, but he was adopted by Isis and became her ally. Osiris was sufficiently restored to life that Isis could become pregnant by him, but it was not enough to truly bring him back to life. Therefore, the underworld was created for him, allowing him to live on after death. Isis would then give birth to Horus, who would grow up and avenge his father, expelling his uncle and taking up Osiris's previous rulership. When the underworld, also known as the Duat, was made for Osiris, he became the ruler of this new realm. This earned him the name Lord of Silence and foremost of the Westerners, as the dead were often called Westerners. Others could enter the Duat through sympathetic magic, by imitating the treatment of Osiris's body. This led to the development of mummification and burial practices, as well as the invention of charms and spells to help the dead pass into eternal life. Initially, it was only the pharaoh who could enter the Duat, but over time, access to the afterlife became democratized. As this happened, the Egyptians also developed the belief that the gods protected the underworld by testing people before they entered. The idea of the judgment by 42 divine judges emerged. The deceased made 42 negative confessions, one for each judge, affirming that they had not sinned in life. Their heart was then weighed against Maat, a complex concept representing truth, balance, and harmony. Maat was both a goddess and a feather that was placed on the scales against the heart. As the king of the underworld, Osiris was the ultimate judge and would welcome those who passed into the afterlife. Those who failed the test were devoured by a monster named Ammit and became nothing. Once they passed into the Duat, the dead were invited to live in the Field of Rushes, which was an idyllic reflection of the real world where they lived alongside the gods. Everyone was granted fertile lands to maintain, which they did using Shabtis figures as laborers. Osiris is typically depicted with green skin, which indicates his status as dead, and the lower part of his body is mummified. He has a pharaoh's beard and holds the typical pharaonic crook and flail as a previous ruler of the world and current ruler of the underworld. He also wears something called the Atef crown, which looks like the white crown of Upper Egypt, but with two curling ostrich feathers. This is presumably the crown of the underworld. Isis is an ancient Egyptian goddess who became the most popular and enduring of all the Egyptian deities. Isis' name comes from the Egyptian Eset, which referred to her stability, and also the throne of Egypt, as she was considered the mother of every pharaoh through the king's association with Horus, Isis' son. Her name has also been interpreted as Queen of the Throne, and her original headdress was the empty throne of her murdered husband Osiris. Her symbols are the scorpion, the kite a kind of falcon whose shape she assumed in bringing her husband back to life, the empty throne, and the sistrum. She is regularly portrayed as the selfless, giving mother, wife, and protectress who places others' interests and well-being ahead of her own. She was also known as Weret Kekau for her power and Mutnetja, mother of the gods, but was known by many names depending on which role she was fulfilling at the moment. As the goddess who brought the yearly inundation of the Nile, which fertilized the land, she was Sati, for example, and as the goddess who created and preserved life, she was Anket, and so on. In time, she became so popular that all gods were considered mere aspects of Isis, and she was the only Egyptian deity worshipped by everyone in the country. She and her husband and son replaced the Theban triad of Ammon, Mut, and Khons, who had been the most popular trinity of gods in Egypt. Osiris, Isis, and Horus are referred to as the Abydos triad. Her cult began in the Nile Delta, and her most important sanctuary was there at the shrine of Behbeit el-Hagar, but worship of Isis eventually spread to all parts of Egypt. Both men and women served Isis as clergy, and no doubt rituals concerning her worship were conducted along the lines of other deities. A temple was built as her earthly home, which housed her statue, and this image was reverently cared for by the priests and priestesses. The people of Egypt were encouraged to visit the temple to leave offerings and make supplications, but no one except the high priest or priestess was allowed into the sanctuary where the statue of the goddess resided. Beyond this, however, little is known of the details of the rituals surrounding her worship. Like the Eleusinian mysteries, the cult of Isis grew into a mystery religion promising the secrets of life and death to initiates, who were then sworn to secrecy. It is known that the cult promised eternal life to those who were admitted to its secrets. The people who worshipped her throughout Egypt may or may not have been full initiates into her cult, and, either way, left no record of how the goddess was honored. It was not until Isis was worshipped in Rome that people wrote about the cult to any great degree, and by then it was clear that knowledge of the rituals involved was only for initiates. Her temple on the island of Philae in Upper Egypt would remain an active pilgrimage site for thousands of years until closed in the 6th century CE by the Christian emperor Justinian. In her role as throne goddess, she was considered the mother of all kings, but her benevolence was not limited to royalty. She is depicted in some stories and inscriptions as a homeless woman, an old woman, a wife searching for and mourning her lost husband, a mother mourning a missing child, a woman fighting for her family, and all of these stories identified her with the common people of Egypt and their darkest moments. Because of this, Isis became the goddess of all the people of Egypt, male and female, royal and common, alike. Along with her husband Osiris, he taught humans the arts of agriculture and medicine and instituted the practice of marriage. Eventually, she became associated with the sea and was a protectress of sailors and merchants who wore talismans honoring her and invoked her aid in times of trouble. Unlike the other gods of Egypt, Isis transcended national borders and was worshipped by the Greeks and the Romans who believed in her as the supreme deity who created the world. Her cult in Rome was the greatest rival to the young religion of Christianity, which drew upon the image of Isis and the child god Horus for the depiction of the Madonna with the Christ child. Her cult would remain one of the most popular in the ancient Mediterranean until Christianity triumphed over the pagan faiths in the 4th-6th century CE, and worship of Isis was outlawed along with that of the other pagan gods. In mythology, Isis was born after the creation of the world. According to the most popular version of the myth, there was once only swirling chaotic waters and darkness in the universe until, one day, a mound rose from the seas with the god Atum standing upon it. Atum gazed out on the eternal nothingness and recognized he was lonely, and so mated with his own shadow to give birth to Shu and Tefnut. These two deities then left their father alone on the primordial mound known as the Ben-Ben and went off to create the world. Atum, alone on the hill in the midst of chaos, longed for his children and worried over their safety, and so he removed his eye and sent it out in search of them. This eye would later become one of the most iconic of all Egyptian images, the all-seeing eye known as the Udjat eye, or Eye of Ra. Shu and Tefnut returned with the eye, having failed to create the world, and Atum was so happy to see them, he began to cry. As his tears fell on the fertile earth of the Ben-Ben, men and women sprang up. These new fragile beings had nowhere to live, however, and so Shu and Tefnut mated and gave birth to Geb and Nut. These two quickly fell in love and became inseparable, a situation Atum found intolerable as they were brother and sister. He pushed Nut high above Geb and fastened her there so the two lovers would be able to see each other but never touch again. Nut, however, was already pregnant by Geb and soon gave birth to 5 children: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus. These 5 gods were given the task of managing the realm of human affairs on the earth, and, from them, came all the other gods of Egypt. Osiris married Isis and, as the firstborn, assumed rule as lord of the earth, with Isis as his queen and consort. The royal couple took their responsibilities so seriously that soon the humans had a paradise to live in with cool, rushing streams, plenty to eat, and a perfect climate. There was no injustice in the land, all women and men were equal, and everyone was at peace. Set was jealous of his brother's power and prestige, however, and so conceived a plan to get rid of him. He had a beautiful coffin made to Osiris' exact height, and then, threw a grand party where he presented this box and told the guests that whichever of them fit in it most perfectly could have it as a gift. When Osiris lay down in the coffin, Set slammed the lid on, fastened it shut, and threw it into the Nile, where it was carried away toward the sea. Isis was distraught when she found her husband was missing, and went searching for him all through Egypt without success. Osiris, meanwhile, had travelled out to sea, and eventually his coffin became lodged in a great tamarisk tree growing near Byblos in Phoenicia. The tree grew quickly around the coffin until it completely contained it. The king of Byblos, Malkander, came to the shore with his wife Astarte and admired the tree and the sweet scent which seemed to emanate from it. He ordered the tree cut down and brought to his palace as an ornamental pillar for the court, and there Osiris remained, trapped inside the coffin within the pillar, until he died. Isis had meanwhile left Egypt in search of her husband and eventually came to Byblos, where she sat down by the shore and cried for her missing husband. The maidens who attended Astarte came to the shore to bathe, and Isis taught them how to care for their hair and plait it. When they returned to the palace, Astarte admired their new hairstyles and the beautiful scent which seemed to float around them. She asked how they had thought of plaiting their hair, and the maidens told her of the mysterious woman by the shore of the sea. Astarte sent for Isis, who was disguised as an older woman, and asked her to tend to her children at court. Isis became particularly fond of the younger child, Dictys, and thought to make him immortal by burning away his mortal weakness in a holy fire. When Astarte entered the room one night and found her nursemaid placing her son in the fire, she screamed, and Isis, startled, assumed her true form as the glorious goddess. Astarte and Malkander were terrified they would be killed and offered her any gifts she wanted. She requested only the pillar, which he swiftly granted to her. The image of this pillar containing the dead god who would return to life was represented later throughout Egyptian culture by the Djed symbol, which regularly appears in Egyptian iconography and architecture and stands for stability. After leaving the court, Isis cut Osiris from the tree and carried his body back to Egypt, where she hid him from Set in the swampy region of the Nile Delta. She left him to go gather herbs to make a potion to return him to life, leaving her sister Nephthys to guard the body. While she was gone, Set learned of his brother's return and went out to find his body. He managed to get Nephthys to tell him where it was, and when he found it, he hacked it into pieces and scattered it across the land and into the Nile. When Isis returned, she was horrified but quickly composed herself and went to work finding the pieces of her murdered husband. With Nephthys' help, she recovered all of the body parts except the penis, which had been thrown into the Nile and eaten by a fish. Isis still was able to revive Osiris and, once he was alive, she assumed the form of a kite and flew around him, drew the seed from his body into her own, and became pregnant with a son, Horus thereby becoming a virgin mother. Even though Osiris now lived, he was incomplete and could no longer rule the land of the living. He withdrew into the afterlife where he became lord and judge of the dead. Isis, fearing what Set might do to her son, hid Horus among the swamps of Egypt until he was grown. At that point, Horus emerged as a mighty warrior and battled Set for control of the world. In some versions of the story, Set is killed, but in most, he is defeated and driven from the land. The chaos Set had unleashed on the world was conquered by Horus, who restored order, and then ruled with his mother and Nephthys as consorts. The myth expresses the central value of Egyptian culture, which was harmony known as Mat expressed in balance. The Egyptians believed that the gods depended on them to live in accordance with eternal values, and chief among these was Mat, symbolized by the goddess of the same name who held the white feather of truth. If one lived in accordance with Mat, one would enjoy a peaceful existence on earth and be rewarded in the afterlife, when one's heart was judged as lighter than the feather of truth, and afterwards be admitted to the paradise known as the Field of Reeds. This concept of balance is expressed repeatedly through images showing Isis and her twin sister Nephthys together, where Isis is light, Nephthys dark, Isis is substantial, Nephthys ether, and so on. Nephthys was never depicted as evil to Isis good, but was associated with death while Isis with life, and so these two sister deities symbolized cosmic balance. Isis personified Maat in every story told about her. One of the most popular is known as Isis and the Seven Scorpions, which highlights Isis' kindness even to those who are not kind to her. The story relates how, when Horus was an infant and Isis was hiding him in the swamplands from Set, 7 scorpions kept her company. She would sometimes go out in the evenings for food, and the scorpions would form a kind of bodyguard around her. 3 of them, Petet, Chetet, and Metet, would go before her to make sure the way was safe, and Set was not waiting in ambush. 2 were on either side of her, Mesetet and Mesetet, and 2 brought up the rear, Tephen and Bephen, who were the most fierce, in case Set came from behind. Whenever she left the swamp, Isis would conceal her glory so she looked like a poor, older woman asking for alms in the town. One night, as she and her bodyguard entered the town, a very rich noblewoman looked down on them from her window and quickly slammed her door and locked it at their approach. The scorpions were angered at this affront to their mistress and decided to make the woman pay. The other 6 scorpions all surrendered their poison to Tephen, who drew it up into his stinger and waited for the right moment. In the meantime, a poor peasant woman had seen the noblewoman refuse hospitality and, even though she had little, offered Isis and her scorpions a place under her roof for the night and a simple meal. While Isis was eating with the young woman, Tephen snuck out of the house and crept beneath the door of the home of the noblewoman, where he stung her young son. The boy fell down in a stupor, and the noblewoman grabbed him up and tried to revive him but could not. She ran into the streets crying for help, and Isis heard her. Even though the woman had refused her food and a place for the night, Isis forgave her. She did not want the boy to pay for his mother's insult. Isis took the child in her arms and called each of the scorpions by their secret name, thereby dominating them and neutralizing their power, and recited spells of great magic. The poison evaporated, leaving the child's body, and he revived. The noblewoman was so grateful and so ashamed of her earlier behavior, she offered all her wealth to Isis and the peasant woman. To an ancient Egyptian hearing the tale, a number of lessons could be drawn. The importance of hospitality, kindness to strangers, forgiveness, refraining from acting in anger, and how the gods are just and kind no matter how undeserving a person might be. If a great goddess like Isis could forgive the insult of the noblewoman, people should likewise forgive each other and help each other. In another version of the story, the goddess Selkut encouraged the scorpions to take revenge on the rich woman's son, and then is ashamed when Isis forgives the woman and heals the boy. Selkut afterwards became the protector of children against venomous bites, thus showing that even a goddess could learn kindness and compassion from the example of Isis. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 331 BCE, his troops associated Isis with the popular Greek goddess Demeter. This association made her accessible to the people of Greece, who initiated their own rituals honoring the Egyptian goddess. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy I Soter took Egypt as his territory in the division of the spoils, and Hellenization of the Egyptian culture continued. Isis was then further associated with Demeter, especially through the similarities in their stories of Demeter's missing daughter, Persephone, and Isis's missing husband, and details from the two separate stories blended together. The Eleusinian Mysteries, the most important religious ritual in ancient Greece, elevated Demeter to the supreme position as keeper of the mysteries of life and death, and Isis eventually came to take on this same role. She traveled to Rome, where she was known as Queen of Heaven and linked to Demeter's counterpart, Ceres, and eventually to Venus. Following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE and the resulting chaos of civil war, the Romans wanted to build a temple to honor Isis, not Venus, hoping for her protection and guidance through the dark times. Augustus Caesar refused to permit this, however, as he viewed the worship of Isis as a dangerous Egyptian belief which would weaken Rome. The gods of Rome were intimately tied to the affairs of state, and Augustus felt encouraging the worship of foreign gods would result in a breakdown of authority. He also simply had a long-standing hatred for Cleopatra VII and all things Egyptian, which no doubt played a part in his decision. Augustus' objections were ignored by his successors, however, and under the reign of Caligula R37 to 41 CE, the worship of Isis in Rome was firmly established by the emperor through the Isiac festival in her honor. The temple known as the Iseum was constructed in the reign of Vespasian, and Domitian built another to honor the goddess during his own reign. Hadrian was particularly fond of Isis and decorated his villa with scenes from her stories. A temple of Isis has been found in Pompeii and another in Great Britain at the Roman site of Londinium. Other temples were built throughout the Roman Empire from Germania through Gaul and Hispania and throughout Asia Minor. The cult of Isis became so popular outside of Egypt that, by the time Christianity was taking form, Isis was the preeminent deity of Europe and the Mediterranean, associated with older goddesses such as Inanna, Aphrodite, and Soska, among others. Isis dominated the religious sensibilities of the people at the same time that Christianity was taking form through the evangelical missions of St. Paul. The concept of the dying and reviving God, which had long been established through the Osiris myth, was now made manifest in the figure of the Son of God, Jesus the Christ. In time, epithets for Isis became those for the Virgin Mary, such as Mother of God and Queen of Heaven, as the new religion drew on the power of the older belief to establish itself. The worship of Isis was the most stubborn of pagan beliefs to rival the new faith and continued longer than any other. In 391 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I decreed that all pagan temples be closed and pagan rites outlawed. The worship of Isis continued, however, and her temple at Philae in Egypt remained open long after others had been shut down, destroyed, dismantled for other projects, or turned into churches. Philae continued as a vital site dedicated to Isis until the Emperor Justinian closed it, along with other important centers of learning and worship in 529 CE. Philae is considered the last of the pagan temples of the ancient world to have stood against the rise of Christianity, and once it was closed, the worship of Isis was fully eclipsed by the new religion. In the same way as Osiris, Isis, and Horus had taken the place of Amun, Mut, and Khons in Egypt, the Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost replaced the Abydos triad as the supreme deities of a new religious understanding. Horus is the name of a sky god in ancient Egyptian mythology, which designates primarily two deities: Horus the Elder, or Horus the Great, the last born of the first 5 original gods, and Horus the Younger, the son of Osiris and Isis. According to the historian Jimmy Dunn, Horus is the most important of the avian deities, who takes on so many forms and is depicted so differently in various inscriptions that it is nearly impossible to distinguish the true Horus. Horus is mostly a general term for a great number of falcon deities. While this is certainly true, the name Horus will usually be found to designate either the older god of the first 5 or the son of Isis and Osiris, who defeated his uncle Set and restored order to the land. According to myth, Horus is the most important of the avian deities, who takes on so many forms and is depicted so differently in various inscriptions that it is nearly impossible to distinguish the true Horus. Horus is mostly a general term for a great number of falcon deities. While this is certainly true, the name Horus will usually be found to designate either the older god of the first 5 or the son of Isis and Osiris, who defeated his uncle Set and restored order to the land. The name Horus is the Latin version of the Egyptian Hor, which means the distant one, a reference to his role as a sky god. The elder Horus, brother of Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, is known as Horus the Great in English or Hawa and Haroeris in Egyptian. The son of Osiris and Isis is known as Horus the Child, who was transformed into the Greek god Harpocrates after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 331 BCE. Harpocrates also means Horus the Child, but the deity differed from the Egyptian Horus. Harpocrates was the Greek god of silence and confidentiality, the keeper of secrets, whose statuary regularly depicts him as a winged child with his finger to his lips. Horus the Younger, on the other hand, was a powerful sky god associated with the sun, primarily, but also the moon. He was the protector of the royalty of Egypt, avenger of wrongs, defender of order, uniter of the two lands, and, based on his battles with Set, a god of war regularly invoked by Egyptian rulers before battle and praised afterwards. In time, he became combined with the sun god Ra to form a new deity, Ra-Harakte, god of the sun who sailed across the sky during the day and was depicted as a falcon-headed man wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt with the sun disk on it. His symbols are the Eye of Horus and the falcon. The elder Horus is one of the oldest gods of Egypt, born of the union between Geb and Nut shortly after the creation of the world. His older brother Osiris was given the responsibility of governing the earth along with Isis, while Horus was given charge of the sky and, specifically, the sun. In another version of the story, Horus is the son of Hathor, while, in others, she is his wife and, sometimes, she is mother, wife, and daughter of Horus. The scholar Geraldine Pinch notes that one of the earliest divine images known from Egypt is that of a falcon in a barku, representing Horus in the sun barge traveling across the heavens. Horus is also depicted as a creator god and benevolent protector. There were many falcon gods in Egyptian religion who were eventually absorbed into the god known as Horus. Some, such as Dunanwi from Upper Egypt, appear early in history, while others, like Montu, were popular later. Horus' early association with Dunanwi has been challenged by scholars, but there is no doubt he was later combined with the god as Horus Anubis. Dunanwi was a local god of the 18th Upper Nome, while Horus was widely worshipped throughout the country. It is possible that, like Inanna in Mesopotamia, the figure of Horus began as a local god such as Dunanwi, but it seems more likely that Horus was fully realized early in Egypt's religious development. It is believed Horus was one of the earliest of Egyptian deities. His name is attested from the beginning of the dynastic period, and it is probable that early falcon deities such as that shown restraining the marsh dwellers on the Narma palette represent this same god. Rulers of the pre-dynastic period in Egypt were known as followers of Horus, which attests to an even earlier point of veneration in Egypt's history. In his role as the distant one, he performs the same task as the distant goddess, a function associated with Hathor and a number of other female deities who go forth from Ra and return, bringing transformation. The sun and the moon were considered Horus' eyes as he watched over the people of the world day and night, but could also draw near to them in times of trouble or doubt. Imagined as a falcon, he could fly far from Ra and return with vital information and, in the same way, could quickly bring comfort to those in need. From the early dynastic period onwards, Horus was linked with the king of Egypt. The Serek, the earliest of the king's symbols, depicted a falcon on a perch. As a result, devotion to Horus spread throughout Egypt, but in various locales, the forms, traditions, and rituals honoring the god varied greatly. This variation gave rise to a number of different epithets and roles for this deity, and eventually led to his transformation from the elder Horus to the child of Osiris and Isis. The younger Horus is sometimes mentioned as related to the older god, but quickly eclipsed him and assumed many of his characteristics. By the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last dynasty to rule Egypt, the elder Horus had been completely replaced by the younger. Statues of Horus the child from the Ptolemaic period show him as a young boy with his finger to his lips, perhaps representing the time when he had to remain quiet when hiding from his uncle Set as a child. In his young form, he came to represent a promise by the gods to take care of suffering humanity, since he had himself suffered as a child and knew how it felt to be fragile and surrounded by dangers. It was this form of Horus who would become the Greek Harpocrates, whom Plutarch called the second son of Isis, and who would go on to become popular in the Roman world. The cult of Isis was the most popular mystery cult in Rome, greatly influencing the development of Christianity, and Harpocrates was the divine son depicted in ancient Roman art with his mother. The story of Horus comes out of the Osiris myth, which was one of the most popular in ancient Egypt and gave rise to the cult of Isis. This story begins shortly after the creation of the world, when Osiris and Isis ruled over a paradise they created. When men and women were born from the tears of Atum, they were uncivilized and barbaric. Osiris taught them culture, religious observances to honor the gods, and the art of agriculture. The people were all equal at this time, men and women, owing to the gifts of Isis which were dispensed to all. Food was plentiful and there was no want or need unfulfilled. Osiris' brother, Set, grew jealous of him, and this envy turned to hatred when Set discovered that his wife, Nephthys, had transformed herself into the likeness of Isis and seduced Osiris. Set was not angry with Nephthys, however, but focused his revenge on his brother, the beautiful one, who had presented a temptation too strong for Nephthys to resist. Set tricked Osiris into laying down in a casket he had made to his brother's exact specifications, and once Osiris was inside, Set slammed the lid on and threw the box into the Nile. The casket floated down the river to eventually lodge in a tamarisk tree by the shores of Byblos, where the king and queen admired its beauty and sweet scent and had it cut down for a pillar in their court. While this was going on, Set has usurped Osiris's rule and reigned over the land with Nephthys. He neglected the gifts which Osiris and Isis had bequeathed, and the land suffered drought and famine. Isis knew she had to bring Osiris back from wherever Set had banished him to, and went out searching for him. She finally found him inside the tree pillar at Byblos, asked the king and queen for it, and brought it back to Egypt. Osiris was dead, but Isis knew she could bring him back to life. She asked her sister Nephthys to stand guard over the body and protect it from Set while she went to gather herbs for potions. Set, meanwhile, had heard that his brother had returned and was out looking for him. He found Nephthys and tricked her into telling him where the body was hidden. Then he hacked Osiris into pieces and scattered the body parts across the land and into the Nile. When Isis came back, she was horrified to find her husband's body missing. Nephthys told her how she had been tricked and what Set had done to Osiris. The two sisters then went in search of the body parts and reassembled Osiris. His penis had been eaten by a fish, and so he was incomplete, but Isis could still return him to life. Isis used her magic and potions and, in some versions of the story, is aided in this by Nephthys. Osiris revived but could no longer rule among the living because he was no longer whole. He would have to descend to the underworld and reign there as Lord of the Dead. Prior to his departure, though, Isis transformed herself into a kite and flew around his body, drawing his seed into her own and becoming pregnant with Horus. Osiris left for the underworld, and Isis went into hiding in the delta region of Egypt to protect herself and her son from Set. Isis endured a difficult pregnancy with exceptionally long labor and gave birth to Horus alone in the swamps of the delta. She hid herself and her son from Set and his demons in the thickets, only going out at night for food accompanied by a bodyguard of 7 scorpions who were given her by the goddess Selkit. Selkit watched over Horus while Isis went out. Isis, Selkit, and Nith nurtured Horus and educated him in their exile until he was grown to manhood and was strong enough to challenge his uncle for his father's kingdom. The story of the battles between Horus and Set have many different versions, but the best known is from a manuscript dating to the 20th dynasty, The Contendings of Horus and Set, which describes their contest as a legal trial in front of the Ennead, a tribunal of 9 powerful gods. In this version of the story, Horus brings a complaint against Set, who is one of the 9, claiming he has unlawfully taken the throne from Osiris, who is also one of the 9 judges. The tribunal is asked to decide between Horus and Set, and most of the gods choose Horus, but Ra, the supreme god, claims that Horus is too young and inexperienced, and Set has the better claim to rule. Horus and Set must compete in a series of battles to prove which is best able to reign. In the course of these battles, Horus loses an eye and Set is castrated, but Horus is victorious each time. These contests go on for over 80 years, and Ra continues to deny Horus his right to the throne. Meanwhile, the land is suffering under Set's rule, and Isis is desperate to do something to help her son and her people. She transforms herself into a beautiful young woman and sits down in front of Set's palace where she begins to cry. When Set comes out and sees her, he asks the cause of her sorrow, and she tells him how a wicked man, her husband's own brother, has killed him and taken his land and, further, seeks the life of her only son and has banished her to the swamplands and the thickets where only the scorpions are her companions. Set is outraged by her story and declares that this man should be punished. He swears that he, himself, will go find this man and cast him from the lands and restore the woman and her child to their rightful place. Isis then throws off her disguise and reveals herself and the other gods in attendance. Set has condemned himself by his own decree, and Ra agrees with the other gods that Horus should be king. Set is then banished to the desert lands beyond Egypt's borders while Horus assumes the throne of his father with his mother and aunt Nephthys as consorts. In another version of the story, the trial lasts for 80 years until the frustrated gods turn to the wise goddess, Neith, mediator of disputes, who rules in favor of Horus. She suggests that Set be given reign of the desert regions while Horus rules the fertile Nile River valley. As a consolation, she proposes Set should also be given 2 foreign goddesses as consorts, the warrior goddess Anat from Syria and Astarte, the Queen of Heaven, from Phoenicia. This version of the story explained how Set came to be associated with people of foreign lands as well as the desert regions. Having conquered Set and restored order, Horus became known as Horu Sema Toi, the Horus, uniter of the 2 lands. He reinstated the policies of his parents, rejuvenating the land, and ruled wisely. It is for this reason that kings of Egypt, from the first dynastic period on, aligned themselves with Horus and chose a Horus name to rule under at their coronation. Osiris had been the first king of Egypt who established order and then passed on to the underworld, while Horus was the king who restored that order after it was overturned by Set and who raised Egypt up from chaos to harmony. Egyptian kings, therefore, identified themselves with Horus in life and Osiris in death. During their reign, they were the physical manifestation of Horus under the protection of Isis. Rameses II famously invokes the protection of Isis and Horus in his poem of Pentor following the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, as do many other kings and pharaohs of Egypt. Since the king of Egypt was the great house who protected his people, all the citizens of Egypt were under the protection of Horus. He was worshipped in many forms and in many different sites. Wilkinson notes that Horus was worshipped along with other deities in many Egyptian temples, and important sites of his worship are known from one end of Egypt to the other. His importance as the uniter of the 2 lands and maintainer of order made him a representation of the concept of balance, which was highly valued by the Egyptians. Horus was worshipped in the same way as any of the other gods of Egypt. Temples were built as homes for the god and his statue placed within the inner sanctum where only the chief priest was allowed to attend him. The clergy of the Horus cult were always male, as they associated themselves with Horus and claimed protection from their mother Isis. Attendant priests took care of the temple complex, which, like any other, was constructed to mirror the afterlife of the Field of Reeds. The reflecting pool of the temple was Lily Lake, which the souls of the justified dead were rowed across by the divine ferryman Hrafhef. The temple was the afterlife palace and home of the god, and the courtyard, decorated with flowers, was his garden. The people of Egypt would come to the courtyard to ask for assistance or to receive alms, deliver donations, or have their dreams interpreted. They would also visit the temple for advice, interpretation of omens, medical assistance, marriage counseling, and for protection from evil spirits or ghosts. The sites of the worship of Horus, as Wilkinson notes above, are too numerous to list, but the major cult centers were Hem, in the Delta region, where Horus was hidden as a child, Pi, the site where Horus lost his eye in his battle with Set, and Bedet. In Upper Egypt, he was worshipped along with Hathor and their son Harsomptus at Edfu and Kom Ombos. Edfu hosted the annual coronation of the sacred falcon, in which an actual falcon was selected to represent the god as king of all Egypt, thus uniting the ancient falcon god with his form as Horus, son of Osiris, and with the king. This ceremony, like other royal festivals, had to do with empowerment of the king and rejuvenation of his reign, but was not as important as the Hebsed festival. Horus was also venerated at Abu Simbel through statuary, and inscriptions and amulets were regularly worn by people seeking his protection. This protection extended through life and beyond death. Horus was associated with the afterlife through his 4 sons who protected the vital organs of the deceased. These 4 gods represented the 4 cardinal points of the compass, and each was presided over and protected by a goddess. The 4 sons of Horus were Duamutef, a jackal god who protected the stomach, represented the east, and was protected by Neith Hapi. A baboon god who protected the lungs, represented the north, and was protected by Nephthys, Imseti. A god in human form who protected the liver, represented the south, and was protected by Isis Kebesnuf. A hawk god who protected the intestines, represented the west, and was protected by Selkit. The organs were held in canopic jars, which sometimes had the head of the protector god as the lid handle. The most famous example of the canopic protectors is the alabaster artifact from the tomb of Tutankhamun, in which Isis, Neith, Nephthys, and Selkit are carved. All four of the protector gods were depicted as mummified men with their respective different heads of jackal, baboon, human, and hawk. These were all seen as manifestations of Horus, who was a friend to the dead. Horus was invoked at funerals for protection and guidance for those who had departed and for the living who remained behind. The cult of Horus in ancient Egypt by the time the Osiris myth became popular, and that myth elevated the worship of Osiris, Isis, and Horus to a national level. The cult of Isis became so popular that worship of the goddess traveled through trade to Greece and then to Rome, where it became the greatest challenge to the new religion of Christianity in the 3 RD 5th centuries. Horus traveled with her in the form of Horus the Child and influenced Christian iconography of the Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. There is no doubt the worship of Isis influenced early Christianity through the concepts of the dying and reviving God who returns from the dead to bring life to the people, eternal life through dedication to that God, the image of the Virgin, Mother and Child, and even the red hue and characteristics of the Christian devil. This is not to say, however, that Christianity is simply the Isis cult repackaged, nor that Horus was the prototype for the risen Christ. Anubis is the Egyptian god of mummification, funerary rites, guardian of tombs, and guide to the afterlife, as well as the patron god of lost souls and the helpless. He is one of the oldest gods of Egypt, most likely developed from the earlier jackal god Wepwawet, with whom he is often confused. Anubis' image is seen on royal tombs from the first dynasty of Egypt, but it is certain he had already developed a cult following prior to this period in order to be invoked on the tomb's walls for protection. He is thought to have developed in response to wild dogs and jackals digging up newly buried corpses at some point in the pre-dynastic period in Egypt, as the Egyptians believed a powerful canine god was the best protection against wild canines. He is depicted as a black canine, a jackal-dog hybrid with pointed ears, or as a muscular man with the head of a jackal. The color black was chosen for its symbolism, not because Egyptian dogs or jackals were black. Black symbolized the decay of the body, as well as the fertile soil of the Nile River Valley, which represented regeneration and life. The powerful black canine, then, was the protector of the dead who made sure they received their due rites in burial and stood by them in the life after death to assist their resurrection. He was known as First of the Westerners, prior to the rise of Osiris in the Middle Kingdom, which meant he was king of the dead. In this role, he was associated with eternal justice and maintained this association later, even after he was replaced by Osiris, who was then given the honorary title First of the Westerners. In earlier times, Anubis was considered the son of Ra and Hesat, but after his assimilation into the Osiris myth, he was held to be the son of Osiris and his sister-in-law Nephthys. He is the earliest Egyptian deity depicted on tomb walls and invoked for protection of the dead, and is usually shown tending to the corpse of the king, presiding over mummification rituals and funerals, or standing with Osiris, Thoth, or other gods at the weighing of the heart of the soul in the Hall of Truth in the afterlife. A popular image of Anubis is the standing or kneeling man with the jackal's head holding the golden scales on which the heart of the soul was weighed against the white feather of truth. His daughter is Kebhet, who brings cool water to the souls of the dead in the Hall of Truth and comforts the newly deceased. Anubis' association with Nephthys and Kebhet emphasizes his long-standing role as protector of the dead and a guide for the souls in the afterlife. The name Anubis is the Greek form of the Egyptian Ampu, which meant to decay, signifying his early association with death. He had many epithets besides First of the Westerners, and was also known as Lord of the Sacred Land. He who is upon his sacred mountain, ruler of the 9 bows, the dog who swallows millions, master of secrets. He who is in the place of embalming, and foremost of the divine booth, referencing his presence in the embalming booth and burial chamber. As his various epithets make clear, Anubis was central to every aspect of an individual's death experience in the role of protector, and even stood with the soul after death as a just judge and guide. Scholar Geraldine Pinch comments on this, writing, "Anubis helped to judge the dead, and he and his army of messengers were charged with punishing those who violated tombs or offended the gods. He was especially concerned with controlling the impulses of those who sought to sow disorder or aligned themselves with chaos." In the early dynastic period and Old Kingdom, Anubis was the sole lord of the dead and righteous judge of the soul. But as the Osiris myth became more popular, the latter god took on more and more of Anubis' attributes. Anubis remained a very popular god, however, and so was assimilated into the Osiris myth by discarding his earlier parentage and history and making him the son of Osiris and Nephthys born of their affair. According to this story, Nephthys was attracted by the beauty of Osiris and transformed herself to appear to him as Isis. Osiris slept with Nephthys and she became pregnant with Anubis but abandoned him shortly after his birth in fear that the affair would be discovered by Set. Isis found out about the affair and went searching for the infant and, when she found him, adopted him as her own. Set also found out about the affair, and this is given as part of the reason for his murder of Osiris. After his assimilation into the Osiris myth, Anubis was regularly seen as Osiris's protector and right-hand man, who guarded the god's body after death, oversaw the mummification, and assisted Osiris in the judgment of the souls of the dead. Anubis was regularly called upon as attested to from amulets, tomb paintings, and in written works for protection and vengeance, especially as a powerful ally in enforcing curses placed on others or defending oneself from such curses. Although Anubis is very well represented in artwork throughout Egyptian history, he does not play a major role in many myths. His early role as Lord of the Dead, prior to assimilation into the Osiris myth, was static as he only performed a single solemn function which did not lend itself to elaboration. As the protector of the dead, who invented mummification and so the preservation of the human body, he seems to have been considered too busy to have involved himself in the kinds of stories told about the other Egyptian gods. The priests of Anubis were male and often wore masks of the god made of wood in performing rituals. The god's cult center was in Upper Egypt at Sinopolis, but there were shrines to him throughout the land and he was universally venerated in every part of the country. Although he does not play a major role in many myths, his popularity was immense, and as with many Egyptian deities, he survived on into other periods through association with the gods of other lands. The Greeks associated him with their god Hermes, who guided the dead to the afterlife. The Super-Canid offered people the assurance that their body would be respected at death, that their soul would be protected in the afterlife, and that they would receive fair judgment for their life's work. These are the same assurances sought by people in the present day, and it is easy to understand why Anubis was such a popular and enduring god. His image is still among the most recognizable of all the Egyptian gods, and replicas of his statuary and tomb paintings remain popular, especially among dog owners in the modern day. Thoth is the Egyptian god of writing, magic, wisdom, and the moon. He was one of the most important gods of ancient Egypt, alternately said to be self-created or born of the seed of Horus from the forehead of Set. As the son of these two deities, he was also god of equilibrium. In this regard, he was also associated closely with both the principle of Maat and the goddess Maat, who personified this principle. Another of his consorts was the goddess Niamatawi, a protector goddess. In his form as Aan, Thoth presided over the judgment of the dead with Osiris in the Hall of Truth, and those souls who feared they might not pass through the judgment safely were encouraged to call upon Thoth for help. The consort most often associated with Thoth was Seshat, goddess of writing, the keeper of books, and patron goddess of libraries and librarians, who was alternately his wife or daughter. Worship of Thoth began in Lower Egypt, most likely in the pre-dynastic period, and continued through the Ptolemaic period, the last dynastic era of Egyptian history, marking Thoth's veneration as among the longest of the Egyptian gods or any deity from any civilization. His name was often taken by the kings of Egypt, scribes, and priests. He is most commonly depicted as a man with the head of an ibis or a seated baboon with or without a lunar disk above his head. He was the patron god of scribes, and it was said that scribes would pour out one drop of their ink in Thoth's honor before they began their daily work. Thoth's Egyptian name was Jehuti, meaning he who is like the ibis. The ibis was a sacred bird in ancient Egypt as well as a popular pet and associated with wisdom. Other forms of his name are Jehuti, Tahuti, Tehuti, Zehuti, Tetu, Tetu, and Lord of the Chemenu, which was his major cult center. Hermopolis was so named because of the Greek association of Thoth with their god Hermes, and to the Greeks Thoth became Hermes Trismegistus. He was also known as Lord of Maat, Lord of Divine Words, Scribe of Maat in the company of the gods, and as a just and incorruptible judge. According to one story, Thoth was born from the lips of Ra at the beginning of creation, and was known as the god without a mother. In another tale, Thoth is self-created at the beginning of time and, as an ibis, lays the cosmic egg which holds all of creation. He was always closely associated with Ra and the concept of divine order and justice. In a third story, the contendings of Horus and Set, when Horus and Set are fighting for the right to rule, Thoth is said to have been created from the semen of Horus, which was accidentally swallowed by Set during the struggle. Thoth was born from Set's forehead and, in some versions, then mediated the struggle between the gods. In every version, Thoth is the scribe who records the events of the contest and offers advice to the gods. He heals both Horus and Set at different times in their battle in order to make sure that both sides are equally capable and none can gain advantage over the other so that the contest will be fair. In this same way, Thoth presided over justice on earth among human beings. As Thoth was credited with the creation of a number of branches of knowledge, he was thought to be an infallible judge capable of rendering completely just decisions. The Greeks admired him so greatly that they credited him as the originator of all knowledge on earth and in the heavens. He was so important to the gods, and especially to Ra, that he was the god chosen to retrieve Re's daughter from the distant lands she sometimes fled to. The motif of the distant goddess appears in a number of Egyptian myths, but always has the same meaning no matter who the specific goddess is or where she has gone. Ra's daughter disagrees with him on some matter and leaves him to vanish into some far-off land, and someone has to be sent to bring her back. Upon her return, she brings some sort of transformation to the people. The distant goddess story also always involved the Eye of Ra, the all-seeing eye, which Ra needed on a daily basis. It was therefore imperative that the goddess be brought back quickly and the eye returned, but she was too powerful to be forced, and the task called for subtlety. As a reward for his services, Thoth was given the goddess Niamtoe as his consort. Thoth was also instrumental in the birth of the original 5 gods of Egypt. When Nut became pregnant by Geb at the beginning of the world, Ra was so angry he decreed she would not give birth on any day of the year. Thoth gambled with Aya, the moon god, for 5 days' worth of moonlight. He won the gamble and divided Aya's moonlight into 5 days of sunlight, which were not part of the year as decreed by Ra. Nut was then able to give birth to each of her children on each of the days. Even though Ra had been angry with his daughter, Nut, he relented and honoured Thoth for his part in getting around Re's decree. Thoth was given a seat of honour in the skyboat, which crossed the heavens by day and, by night. Thoth helped to drive away the serpent Apophis, who sought to destroy the sun god. His participation in the overthrowing of Apophis linked him to the cycle of day and night, and so intimately to the lives of human beings. Thoth created the written word people used to record their history and keep track of their daily lives. According to some stories, Thoth invented the word and gave it to humanity, while, in others, Thoth was the creator and his consort Seshat gave words to the people. In still other variations, Thoth was the creator, but Osiris or Isis gave words to humanity. In every case, Thoth is the creator of written language and the literary arts both for humans and the gods. Thoth was therefore linked with the concept of fate, even though this responsibility was shared in different variations of the myths from different eras with the 7 Hathors or other deities. As the record keeper of the gods, Thoth also kept account of the days of human beings. Bastet is the Egyptian goddess of the home, domesticity, women's secrets, cats, fertility, and childbirth. She protected the home from evil spirits and disease, especially diseases associated with women and children. As with many deities in Egyptian religion, she also played a role in the afterlife. She is sometimes depicted as a guide and helper to the dead, although this was not one of her primary duties. She was the daughter of the sun god Ra and is associated with the concept of the Eye of Ra and the distant goddess. Bastet was one of the most popular deities of ancient Egypt, as she was the protector of everyone's home and family. Bastet was extremely popular throughout Egypt, with both men and women from the 2nd dynasty of Egypt onward, with her cult centered at the city of Bubastes from at least the 5th century BCE. She was first represented as a woman with the head of a lioness and closely associated with the goddess Sekhmet, but as that deity's iconography depicted her as increasingly aggressive, Bastet's images softened over time to present more of a daily companion and helper than her earlier forms as Savage Avenger Dot. Although she was greatly venerated, she was equally feared, as 2 of her titles demonstrate, the Lady of Dread and the Lady of Slaughter. She is associated with both Mao, the divine cat who is an aspect of Ra, and with Mafdet, goddess of justice and the first feline deity in Egyptian history. Both Bastet and Sekhmet took their early forms as feline defenders of the innocent, avengers of the wronged, from Mafdet. This association was carried on in depictions of Bastet's son Marhez, protector of the innocent, who is shown as a lion-headed man carrying a long knife or as a lion. In Bastet's association with Mao, she is sometimes seen destroying the enemy of Ra, Apophis, by slicing off his head with a knife in her paw, an image Mao is best known by. In time, as Bastet became more of a familial companion, she lost all trace of her leonine form and was regularly depicted as a house cat or a woman with the head of a cat, often holding a sistrum. She is sometimes rendered in art with a litter of kittens at her feet, but her most popular depiction is of a sitting cat gazing ahead. Bastet appears early in the 3rd millennium BCE in her form as an avenging lioness in Lower Egypt. By the time of the pyramid texts, she was associated with the king of Egypt as his nursemaid in youth and protector as he grew. In the later coffin texts, she retains this role but is also seen as a protector of the dead. Her cult center at Bubastis in Lower Egypt became one of the richest and most luxuriant cities in Egypt as people from all over the country traveled there to pay their respects to the goddess and have the bodies of their dead cats interred in the city. In Egyptian art, her iconography borrowed from the earlier goddess Mafdet and also from Hathor, a goddess associated with Sekhmet, who was also closely linked to Bastet. The appearance of the sistrum in Bastet's hand in some statues is a clear link to Hathor, who is traditionally seen carrying the instrument. Hathor is another goddess who underwent a dramatic change from bloodthirsty destroyer to gentle friend of humanity, as she was originally the lioness deity Sekhmet, whom Ra sent to Earth to destroy humans for their sins. In Bastet's case, although she became milder, she was no less dangerous to those who broke the law or abused others. The goddess was worshipped primarily at Bubastis, but held a tutelary position at Saqqara and elsewhere. Herodotus is the primary source for information on the cult of Bastet and, unfortunately, does not go into great detail on the particulars of her worship. It seems both men and women served as her clergy and, as with the other Egyptian deities, her temple at Bubastis was the focal point of the city, providing services ranging from medical attention to counseling to food distribution. The people of Egypt came annually to the great festival of Bastet at Bubastis, which was one of the most lavish and popular events of the year. According to myth, women were freed from all constraints during the annual festival at Bubastis. They celebrated the festival of the goddess by drinking, dancing, making music, and displaying their genitals. This raising of the skirts by the women had as much to do with freedom from social constraints as it did with the fertility associated with the goddess. As with many of the other festivals throughout Egypt, Bastet's celebration was a time to cast aside inhibitions, much in the way modern revelers do in Europe during Carnival or in the United States at Mardi Gras. This festival outstripped all others in magnificence and excess. In reality, there were many festivals celebrating many gods which could claim the same. The popularity of this goddess, however, made her celebration of particular significance in Egyptian culture. Bastet, in fact, was second only to Isis in popularity and, once she travelled through Greece to Rome, was equally popular among the Romans and the subjects of the later Roman Empire. The popularity of Bastet grew from her role as protector of women and the household. As noted, she was as popular among men as women in that every man had a mother, sister, girlfriend, wife, or daughter who benefited from the care Bastet provided. Further, women in Egypt were held in high regard and had almost equal rights, which almost guaranteed a goddess who protected women and presided over women's secrets an especially high standing. Cats were also greatly prized in Egypt as they kept homes free of vermin, protected the crops from unwanted animals, and provided their owners with fairly maintenance-free company. One of the most important aspects of Bastet's festival was the delivery of mummified cats to her temple.